Ruth Wallace pioneered research on women's roles in religious organizations and life. Raised a good Catholic, she graduated from Immaculate Heart College in 1961 and earned a master's degree in sociology from Notre Dame in 1963. But then she completed her doctoral dissertation at Berkeley between 1963 and 1968, a radical time and place that pointed her solidly in the direction of feminist research, even though she retained her abiding interest in religion and society. After finishing her PhD, Wallace taught at Immaculate Heart College in Los Angeles for a couple of years before taking a position at George Washington University, where she remained for the rest of her career until her death in 2016. She continued to study Catholic religious organization throughout her career, publishing her book, They Call Her Pastor, in 1992. This article is a spin-off from that book, published the following year. To balance the subject, in 2013, she subsequently published another book, They Call Him Pastor, Married Men in Charge of Catholic Parishes. In both these works, Wallace examines the social and demographic trends that sometimes push religious groups to change fundamental features of the way they are organized as social institutions. Women in many societies must live with some of the great ironies of life. As little girls, often they learn to put highest emphasis on their roles in the family as an institution, but they then frequently outlive these roles and find themselves alone in old age. We already have seen that they also learn to place particular emphasis on religiosity, praying and attending religious services more than men. And the irony in this case is that a few of those men monopolize all of the leadership positions in such religious organizations. Ruth Wallace begins our examination of this ironic contrast between the higher religiosity of women and their virtual exclusion from leadership in most religious contexts. Wallace considers the Roman Catholic Church as an example of the inconsistency between religious commitment and organizational rewards for women, with particular attention to the situation in the United States. The situation she outlines, however, is generating challenges to the established historical leadership patterns of the Catholic Church all over the world. In the United States, the last half-century has brought demographic success for Catholicism. Whether we rely on the official statistics of registered Catholics reported by the Church itself, or estimate Catholic populations from self-reports of religious affiliation in national opinion surveys, the trend has been the same. The Catholic population has expanded at a respectable rate for many decades now. Some people might guess that this population growth resulted from an excess of births over deaths, given the reputation of Catholicism for encouraging births and discouraging all forms of birth control. However, most of the growth in the American Catholic population over the past half-century has not come from such natural increase, but rather from net immigration. The latest wave of immigrants into the country originated disproportionately from countries with large Catholic populations, or in some cases, such as countries in Asia and the Pacific, where immigrants to the United States often included large numbers of Catholics who had been religious minorities in those countries. In fact, if any Catholics today continue to have more children than other Americans, this tendency is most noticeable among such immigrants. In short, the demand for more Catholic leaders increased steadily over the past half-century as the population of Catholics in the country expanded. A well-known mismatch has developed, however, between this increasing demand for leaders and the number of Catholic priests available to fill these positions. Instead of rising along with the general Catholic population, the number of Catholic priests active in parish ministry in the United States has been falling steadily over the same past half-century. There are only about half as many active priests leading congregations today as there were in 1970. While the demand for their services has been growing, the supply of these potential religious leaders has been falling. Any mismatch between supply and demand generates tensions within any organization or community, and the Catholic Church has been no exception. If people experience a shortage of beef, for example, they may begin to buy more pork, fish, or chicken instead. If people experience a shortage of priests, they may look around for somebody else to lead their congregations. But why has one of the largest religious organizations in the world experienced this drastic shortage of priests? Why has the number of priests available to congregations dropped by about half while the church itself was growing so successfully? Wallace reviews several components contributing to this growing problem. In the first place, the number of people who complete preparations for the priesthood and take holy orders each year has been falling, just like the number of priests already in those orders. Even 50 years ago, the annual number of ordinations fell short of what would be needed to sustain a steady size for the priesthood. And now that problem is even worse. Opinions vary about why so few men want to be priests now. Of course, there's always the matter of taking a vow of poverty, an idea that goes against the grain for some people, particularly in an entrepreneurial society like the United States. But this has been a hallmark of the Catholic Church for many centuries, including ages when there were priests to be found all over the place in Catholic Europe. There's also the vow of celibacy, often regarded as unnatural for men. In fact, this may be why a rising share of the men who do enter the priesthood are doing so later and later in life, so that the average age at ordination is rising even as the number of new priests has declined. Other scandals in the church have not helped the public image of the priesthood or encouraged people to consider such careers. At the same time, the rising average age of priests guarantees that the number of deaths and retirements that must be made up by new additions will be increasing. And this will cut into the number of active priests from the other end of the career cycle and reinforce the shortage. The result of this mismatch between demand for priests and the available supply is easy to predict. Without enough new priests, a growing Catholic population does not find enough new parish congregations to join, so they must crowd into the same existing parishes. In fact, the number of Catholic congregations in the country reached a peak before the turn of the century and actually has been declining continuously in the early years of the 21st century. The number of these existing parishes where a priest has retired or died or perhaps simply resigned from his position has been climbing from dozens to hundreds to thousands today. Faced with this leadership problem, obviously the church had to do something. Pope John Paul XXIII actually saw this whole thing coming many decades ago and set in motion the machinery of the Catholic hierarchy. In due course, official canon law governing church affairs was revised. Canon 517.2 now allows a Catholic bishop to appoint somebody who is not a priest to provide pastoral care for a parish where no priest is available. Of course, that non-priest person must be supervised by a real priest, but one such priest can supervise several different non-priests who are actually providing pastoral care for different parishes. Not a great solution, but what else can you do in a situation like this? And the punchline of this story, as far as Ruth Wallace is concerned, is that if you take a closer look at who gets appointed by the bishops to provide pastoral care to these parishes who've lost out in the lottery for the available ordained priests, it turns out that 3/4 of them are women. Most of these women are Catholic sisters, but some of them are also ordinary laypersons who have not taken any kind of holy orders. Here again, in the American religious landscape, we see market forces of supply and demand pouring through an established, institutionalized religious setting, and like a torrent of water, eroding old landscapes and leaving new ones in their place. The contours of this new religious landscape are what Wallace describes in her first-person observations. While we often consider research on religion and society that builds up a wide-scale picture from statistical evidence, Wallace's research approach is very different. She traveled all around the United States and conducted first-person interviews and field observations in carefully selected Catholic parishes in different states and regions. While there's no guarantee that such research would come to the same conclusions if you selected different parishes or people to interview and observe, this first-person participant observation style of research does allow much richer, more detailed observations to be made. Different theoretical approaches provide ways for us to organize such observations. In her writing, Wallace reflects the fact that she was trained to look at these questions from a perspective called social constructionism. Here again, we run into Peter Berger, who, along with his colleague Thomas Luckman, literally wrote the book on the social construction of reality. They find it helpful to think of social interactions between people as a creative process. All of us need to interact with other people all the time in order to get even the simplest things done in our lives. Berger and Luckman start from a basic assumption that in any such interactions, we want things to go in a smooth and predictable manner. Unpredictability is inefficient and also can bring nasty surprises. From our earliest moments, we are always looking for patterns and predictability from our parents, our peers, and even strangers. In fact, whenever possible, we consciously try to shape these interactions with other people to make them predictable in this way, so that we can achieve the goals we seek by interacting with others. Berger and Luckman call the results of such efforts habits. But as we work on these interactions persistently year after year, they become much more than that. When enough people collaborate in shaping social life to go along predictable paths, the results can be very powerful. You may not think much about it, but in America, every car you see coming at you on the highway should keep to the right, and so should you. If everybody follows this rule, fewer cars crash into each other. Then somebody figures out that pedestrians walking along the road should always walk on the left, facing oncoming traffic, so that they can look every driver in the eye, and every driver can return the glance and know that you aren't going to jump out in front of the car. This is purely an arbitrary rule, as we can see if we go to England, where everybody is driving on the other side of the road, and where, as a result, pedestrians should walk on the right, again facing oncoming traffic. You may even find these traffic habits carry over into other settings, so that when people in the United States walk on a crowded sidewalk, everybody tends to walk on the right as though it were a highway. You're even supposed to dim your lights and not stare directly into other people's faces when they're walking toward you and come within a certain distance. And in England, people on sidewalks tend to walk on the left again, as though the sidewalk were a miniature highway. The point of such trivial examples is that the same thing happens all the time at a much deeper level, and when people have developed more important patterns of habitual or normal behavior and attitudes, such as an organized religion like the Catholic Church, or perhaps a coven of pagans who worship at Stonehenge, that pattern of activity looks and feels like some kind of objective external reality that is just out there in the world, even though you yourself are helping to create and sustain the pattern by your own actions. When you take the mental shortcut of thinking of patterned behavior like a church service as an objective social reality in this way, it in fact does become real in the sense that the pattern itself produces real consequences, including personal consequences for you. This is what Berger and Luckman mean by social construction. We all get together and collaborate in creating habitual patterns of interaction, and then we tend to forget that such patterns are just things we've created together and start thinking about them as objective things that are just out there in the world for us to deal with. These perceived objective things are what we call social institutions. For Wallace, each of the Catholic women leaders that she visited and interviewed had to confront just such a perceived institutional reality in the form of an established Catholic parish, with all of its members who expect certain things to happen in the life of the church. One of these things, of course, is for a man, not a woman, who has been ordained as a priest to take charge of life in that parish, to deliver religious messages and rewards and sanction and assistance to them. This social reality is something that these women face as an external reality they must deal with, just as real in its own way as a brick wall or a wide flowing river. But the other side of the coin that Wallace wants to study in such parish situations appears when each Catholic woman leader remembers that she too is a participant in the ongoing social construction of life in her parish. When we recognize that we each are part of the machinery that creates this marvelous apparent external reality of social institutions, this realization gives us the ability consciously to try to influence the specifics of how that institutional setting works. We realize that as one of its working parts, we each have some ability to shape and change the social world that we encounter every day. This realization and our resulting decisions and actions aimed at controlling and changing social situations is called agency, because we are the agents of such changes. So Wallace interviews the Catholic lay leaders that she meets in each parish to find out how each of them understands her own agency, her own ability to shape and change life in that parish. She also wants to know exactly what each of them sees when she meets and talks with the members of her parish. What are the institutionalized rules of the game? What do people appear to expect from her? Do they accept her as a leader? And most importantly, what does she think that she can do to make it possible for them to accept her as their leader? At the same time, Wallace also wants to get a first-hand look at the other people participating in the ongoing process of creating and sustaining the social reality of the Catholic parish as an institutionalized set of habitual or normal social interactions. What do these people seem to expect? Does the leader that Wallace interviewed really understand these people or not? Do they seem to accept her, or is she disrupting the habitual patterns that they want to have in their lives? How are they reacting to the fact that she has been appointed by a bishop somewhere to act in a leadership role among them? Wallace's investigation opens up the social context that has been created by Catholic efforts to deal with the shortage of priests, so that we can examine the process of interactions going on inside each of these parishes as people negotiate new social realities among themselves. The female leaders that Wallace visited in selected Catholic parishes around the United States faced a challenging situation, to say the least. In each one of these places, the congregation had lost an ordained priest who once had been the appointed and acknowledged leader of the congregation. The Roman Catholic Church has been for centuries a clearly hierarchical organization, starting from the unquestioned authority of the Pope as God's infallible voice and representative on earth, and working down through cardinals and bishops to the ordained priests who occupy positions of authority and control in each local parish. A priest must follow a higher law than the average member of a congregation, including not only the vows he took at ordination, but a whole catalog of priestly behavior that sets him apart and above other people. From this elevated position and authority, the Church declares that he has the right and the power to administer all the sacraments that put ordinary people in contact with the realm of the sacred. He baptizes new believers into the Church, hears confessions, grants absolution for confessed sins, consecrates the host, the transformation of bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ, as part of the worship service, administers the host to parishioners, marries couples in the eyes of God, and even gives them final rites when they lie upon their deathbeds. The priest is a gatekeeper between the rest of us and God. It would be understandable if, when a parish loses its priest and no new one can be assigned, that people might get a little upset. They might legitimately feel that the gate between themselves and God has been closed and latched, leaving them out in the cold, cruel, and sinful world, not without a prayer, but at least without a priest. So how did Wallace find that people reacted when their bishop sent them a non-priest instead, and in fact a female non-priest, to take care of pastoral duties and see to their needs in the parish? The general answer that she discovered was, of course, that many people were not thrilled with this turn of events. Once in a while, these Catholic women leaders encountered somebody, often also a woman, who would express great joy to see a woman in a position of power, usually reserved only for men. But after all, even with the bishop's blessing and with the supervision of a real priest, she could not really take the place of the former priest in all of his capacities and duties. As one person remarked to one of the leaders that Wallace interviewed, "I hope you're not sensitive, but it was our turn for a good priest, and we got you. It's not you. You have to know that. No matter how good you are, you're not going to be good enough. People are not going to accept you, and you're going to have a hard time." This was not an isolated comment either. Wallace tells us directly that she selected illustrative quotes like this to show the main trend of comments and responses that she got from many people. If you can put yourself in the place of one of these Catholic women leaders going into a new parish, imagine that somebody made this comment to you. It would be pretty hard to take. It wouldn't do a lot for your self-confidence or make you very optimistic about your future in the parish. So after talking with them, how does Wallace find that these Catholic women leaders responded to such disappointment and dissatisfaction? Fortunately for them, the church does have professional training available so that they can learn how to perform the duties of ministering to a parish, and more importantly, leadership skills needed to communicate with parishioners and respond to them in a constructive fashion. The main change that Wallace discovered in talking to these women leaders took the form of a shift from what had often been a rather top-down, hierarchical style employed by the previous priest to a more team-oriented process of negotiation, listening, and trying to involve people more in decision-making. This may have been a result of the training these women had enjoyed, or it may also in part simply reflect the different leadership styles often observed for women compared to men in positions of authority. Similar differences have been noticed in business organizations and in government work. For example, one of these women told Wallace, "Leadership is listening to parishioners' initiatives. A leader listens and then articulates the needs and directions of the community and finds ways to name it and facilitate it." This is the same lesson imparted to people training to do counseling work of many kinds, from marriage counselors to students supervising other students in dormitories. This leader continued, "The most valuable thing I think anybody could have who would find themselves in this position would be to maintain their sense of deep respect for all of the people that you work with and not think that you're in a position of authority over them." This sort of teamwork approach to parish life sounds very enlightened and is based on sound training advice from modern experts on leadership. However, one can easily imagine that for a parish accustomed to a more authoritarian leadership style from a traditional parish priest, this new direction might look like weakness or uncertainty about the right way to do things. Women can be accused of weakness at the drop of a hat anyway, so the attitude expressed by Wallace's interviewee might not have worked out too well for her. We need not worry too much about this, though. The general feeling that Wallace found among parishioners as they responded to the new approach, typical of the Catholic women leaders, turned out to be very positive. One comment sums this up. "Before, services would be over and people would be gone. Now you see them hanging around, and they really have developed a wonderful sense of community. They're not looking to the priest anymore for their answers. They are really making some decisions in terms of their own parish plans and facilities. Collections have gone way up, and they're making decisions on how to use that." Apparently, participatory democracy is popular in American congregations, even Catholic ones. This might bode well for the future of women leaders in the Catholic Church, even if they're not allowed to become actual priests. The social construction of religious reality will always be an ongoing process, with room for all the actors involved to see whether their personal sense of agency can find some traction and contribute to that process.